I have a cause. We need those, don't we? Otherwise, the darkness and the cold gets in and everything starts to ache. My soul has a purpose. It is to love. If I do not fulfill my heart's vocation, I suffer. I came across this poem during my silent retreat study leave last month, and it spoke to me profoundly. Every time I read that poem, I shudder in recognition. My soul has a purpose. It is to love. I'd never heard this said so beautifully. It rings so true for me. I believe we are here to learn to love more deeply. And I think that's what our Unitarian Universalist faith is all about. After all, we are called first and foremost to see the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Not an easy feat. And it requires us to love. At first I thought, what a beautiful poem by Rumi or Hafiz, right? Sounds like that. Because they're always talking about love as the core of our being, the reason for our existence. But then I discovered it was actually the 13th century Christian mystic and monk, St. Thomas Aquinas. In fact, in London, the street I lived on was called Aquinas Street. So I've had a subtle connection to this saint for a while now, it seems. And on this retreat, I discovered his poetry. In a later poem called "Could You Embrace That?", Aquinas asks how to love God fully, and God replies, "There is a hideous blemish on my body. Though it is such an infinitesimal part of my being, could you kiss it if it were revealed?" "I will try, Lord, I will try," he responds. And then God said, "That blemish is all the hatred and cruelty in the world." How do we kiss all the hatred and cruelty in the world? If the word God is challenging or meaningless for you, replace it with the word love. Love is both a verb and a noun. Imagine if love calls us to kiss the blemish that is the hatred and cruelty in this world. What a challenge! But I believe that is what our universalist faith calls us to do. It calls us to love all, to love every part of this existence, blemishes and all. To love as if everyone's freedom, everyone's happiness depends on our loving them. What a tall order. What a thing to persevere with, for it's much easier to turn away from blemishes in disgust, isn't it? And to try to imagine that they're not part of us. Yet we all have blemishes. So this call to love the world, blemishes and all, this universalist aspiration calls me to persevere with love in the face of hate. To persevere with love in the face of hate. Now, I was amazed to discover that a famous secular writer, the Russian Leo Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace, as many of you know, he also wrote about the saving grace of love. Tolstoy wrote, "Love is the only way to rescue humanity from all its ills." Love is the only way to rescue humanity from all its ills. In fact, in 1909, it was Tolstoy who asked Mahatma Gandhi in a letter to consider the concept of nonviolence as a way to respond to British colonialism. Tolstoy called for Indians to confront British imperialism with love and nonviolence. Tolstoy told Gandhi about nonviolence. Gandhi was deeply impacted by this letter and shared his thoughts about it. He writes, "One of the most accepted and time-honored methods to attain nationalism is that of violence. Tolstoy's life has been devoted to replacing the method of violence for removing tyranny and securing reform by the method of non-resistance to evil. He would meet hatred expressed in violence by love expressed in self-suffering. He admits of no expectation to whittle down this great and divine law of love. He applies it to all the problems that trouble mankind. There is only love. There is only love." Last week I met Rashad al-Dabagh, a Muslim American who was talking about how to help refugees from countries like Syria and Afghanistan assimilate into American culture. People who had fled for their lives to start a new life in this country. Rashad spoke about how his organization hosted an Eid festival, that's E-I-D, to help Muslim refugees feel welcome in our country. Eid is a Muslim celebration in which people are encouraged to forgive and let go of grudges. It's a joyous time of community, of sharing food and festivity. Rashad shared a moving story about what happened at this peaceful festival in Anaheim, full of laughing children and families, when they were met with protest and hate. He told me that they'd caught this on video. And when I first saw the extended video and saw the men saying really vile and hateful things to women and children, my stomach churned. It was almost intolerable to watch. What is it in our society at this time that foments so much hate and anger? These men, avowed Christians, were taunting and threatening innocent people. And words don't do this justice, so I want us to watch a brief video summary that shows you what happened.
This religion is killing people. You have no idea. Bring it on there, Mohammed, or whatever your name is.
Their intention was to instigate a fight. It became a party, and this was the whole purpose of the event, is to celebrate. It's Eid festival. People loved it so much that the next day, everyone was prepared to dance again. There wasn't any other way to respond to their hate but to celebrate and dance. That was their way to respond to hate, with love, with compassion.
Perhaps you're feeling as moved and optimistic as I was when I first saw what happened. These people were modeling how to kiss the blemish of hatred and cruelty in this world. I watched this transformation with amazement as this group of Muslims chose to dance joyously in the face of hate. They were so committed to peace and love that they prioritized that over getting caught up in hate. They knew that arguing would simply result in violence and more hate. So instead, they remained devoted to the essence of their religion and to the essence within themselves, which is love and joy. They modeled nonviolence for us so beautifully. They modeled kissing the blemish. Now, I know that when I've been at actions or rallies with many of you, and we've been faced with anger or hate from those who think differently, at times, I admit, I've felt frozen and fearful. I've been unclear how to respond to the hateful rhetoric. Should we argue with them? Should we teach them the error of their ways? Should we educate them about compassion for their fellow human beings? But that doesn't usually end with them changing their views, does it? That usually ends with more anger and violence, and then no one wins. I believe the hate we are seeing so vividly all over our country comes from a place of fear. People are scared that the America they know is going to be damaged by people who think differently from them. They are afraid that other religions or races or genders will somehow overpower or lessen their worth. They fear that all they have ever known is going to be turned upside down. And they will fear that they will lose all that they value. And it's easy to judge that as ignorant or wrong. I know I have. But if we are to love the blemish of hatred and cruelty in this world, then we need to find compassion for our fellow human beings who are just acting out of fear. The same fear that drives most human beings. It's a fear about survival and having enough. It can cause us to make others who don't think like us wrong. It causes us to others. And as soon as we become separate, we cease to see the humanity in the other. We cease to care about each other. And we cease to see each other like human beings just like us. Yet underneath these tough exteriors, I believe people are crying out to be loved and approved of. Thich Nhat Hanh says that when another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over. He doesn't need punishment, he needs help. That's the message he is sending. When I observe vitriol in another, I try to imagine, what if I had met this person as an infant? What if I'd held them as a baby and they had that new human smell? And they smiled and gurgled and drooled. I would have absolutely fallen in love with them. A being filled with hope and smiles and innocence and trust. That's the core of who we are. That is our essence. And then life happens. And over time, depending on our childhoods and influences, we form our personalities with positions and opinions that lead us to disconnect from one another, that lead us to be cruel to one another. And we believe these positions help us survive. They help us separate from our parents and individualize. But that collection of positions and opinions is not who we truly are. We're not just a conglomeration of thoughts, of knowledge and positions. Those opinions and stances change over time as we are placed under different influences. Who we are is so much deeper, so much more sacred. I believe that at our core, at our essence, there is only love. We are love. There is only love. Love that heals, love that sets us free. There is only love. In the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, the light of the soul is love. Where love is, there is contentment and peace. Be not the destroyers of yourselves. Arise to your true being, and then you will have nothing to fear. Indeed, all spiritual teachings call us to love. Love is the aspiration of all religions, from Judaism to Christianity and Islam, from Buddhism to Hinduism, from Jainism to Taoism, as well as in the writings of the Greek and Roman sages. The poet Maya Angelou calls us to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Michelle Obama, former First Lady and my Princeton classmate, famously said, "When they go low, we go high." And it is at the low moments precisely that we need to tap into that love more than ever, to embody or become love in some way. But how do we do that? Believe me, I know this isn't easy. I often wrestle with the ideal of this as opposed to the reality. We're so readily taken over by our baser instincts of survival and getting an eye for an eye. It's far easier to close our hearts than to open them in the face of pain or struggle. So we have to practice, and not just every now and then, but daily. We have to practice being more loving and tender with ourselves, and thereby also being more able to be more loving with others. When someone is attacking you, essentially they want to control you or make you wrong. Reasoning with them, arguing, defending, or explaining will usually escalate the situation. In those moments, perhaps the best thing we can do is lovingly disengage and get present to the love within us. We do not advance our cause by meeting anger with anger, or judgment with judgment, or control with resistance. That will just entrench the other's position further. When we are faced with anger, it's the sign of someone hurting, someone being out of step with their true nature of love. It's a sign that they're attempting to create safety for themselves by trying to control the world around them. So that's the time for us to find empathy and compassion, to listen to their hurt, even if we don't agree with it. That's the time to try to remember their essence, which is love. That's the time to try to imagine their highest being and not just focus on their wounded egoic self. Now, I admit this is incredibly hard to do. I fail every day at this, especially in the face of bullies. It's probably one of the hardest things there is to not get caught up in reaction and stay centered within. It's easy to lose our own connection with the love within. But learning to do this while hate and anger is being magnified around us is more important now than ever. It's our only hope for the future, my friends, if we are not to destroy one another and this planet. I believe it's what we are called to live as Unitarian Universalists. We are answering the call of love, aren't we? Yes, we're the love people. As you may know, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. studied nonviolence with Gandhi and made it a core teaching of his life too. He said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." So during these hate-filled times, Dr. King's teachings are especially important. We have to work hard not to counter hate and anger with a similar energy. If we do, we lose. Everyone loses. And we join them in valuing hate and fear over love. We go low. King tells us in his sermon, "A tough mind and a tender heart," that through nonviolent resistance, we shall be able to oppose the unjust system and at the same time love the perpetrators of the system. We cannot counter hate with hate, or we are drawn into the same game, or we increase the hatred in this world. We must counter hate with love. We must persevere with love. We must act with love. We must practice love. And that begins with connecting with the love within ourselves for ourselves. It begins with focusing our lives on how to be more loving. Indeed, Dr. King said, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. So how do we practice being more loving? As we approach Valentine's Day this week and we reflect on love, it's easy to think of love as a romantic feeling, as a mushy, gooey, enamored state of being. And of course, that's fun. But love is so much more than that. Love is also fierce, especially when it protects life itself. Love is joyous. Love is whatever softens and opens our hearts. Love is compassion for our complex human selves and the inevitable suffering that exists in this life. The way to access love is through things that make us feel happy and joyous. Things like dancing or like singing or reading great poetry, beholding beauty, being out in nature and marveling at the magnificence of this universe, coming to this fellowship and worshiping and laughing together, giving or receiving hugs, things like standing in solidarity together, lovingly, arm in arm, resisting hatred and cruelty. I invite you to start noticing what allows you to soften your heart. What allows you to feel more peaceful and loving and connected to all existence? What allows you to stay whole and grounded in the face of anger or hate? Now, it may mean that you don't watch as much of the TV news, which is so focused on fear. Or it may mean that you lessen your involvement with Facebook. Or it may mean that you create a daily practice of meditation or prayer. It may mean that you sing more or read poetry or do whatever brings more peace and love to your life. Love shows us we are not separate beings. Our seventh principle reminds us that we are an interdependent web of existence. If we truly live from this place of awareness of our connectedness and of our interdependence, we wouldn't harm one another. It would feel like harming ourselves. So I invite us, in honor of Valentine's Day this week, to experiment with meeting anger and fear with love. Are you game? Yep. Next time somebody does something that triggers you and you're tempted to respond with anger or judgment, try to think beyond the trigger. Take a breath and remember to imagine them as an infant. And then have empathy for that infant who's had to fight so hard to be heard or feel safe for whatever reason. Remember the loving essence of that being and have compassion for their struggle. Remember to kiss the blemish. Then respond. I have a cause. We need those, don't we? Otherwise, the darkness and the cold gets in and everything starts to ache. My soul has a purpose. It is to love. If I do not fulfill my heart's vocation, I suffer. My friends, may we always seek to grow our love. And every day, find and create more love somewhere.